So when I was in the hospital at the peak of COVID, the hospital had me actually on quarantine for COVID because they did not know what it was that I had. I was diagnosed with GBS in 2021 at 28 years old. I did not know anything about GBS, nor did I know what neuropathy was. Now that I'm semi-recovered from GBS, I feel that it's important to spread the news about what GBS is and that there's life after it. So my very first symptom in 2020 actually happened on Boxing Day, and I felt tingling in my fingers. Eventually that progressed to tingling in my feet as well, and my back was more pain than I've ever felt in my entire life. What I eventually learned is that it was the physical nerves in my body literally burning inside of my limbs and into the central nervous system of my back, or peripheral nervous system. It's now 2-3 days have passed. The symptoms have gotten worse. Everything is closed because it's between Christmas and New Year's. The hospitals were telling everybody to stay home unless it's an emergency, and I didn't know what this was, so I stayed home because I assumed it would go away. But when it didn't, and my legs were collapsing under my own weight, and I had a 7-month-old daughter that I was afraid I was gonna fall on or fall while carrying her, I chose to stay away. I was eventually diagnosed in the hospital, which would have been about the 5th of January. I needed a wheelchair to get transported from the car into emergency. Initially, nurses and doctors thought it might have been COVID. I disagreed with them because this is nothing like what any of the symptoms are from COVID. And at this point, the pain had gotten more and more unbearable. My reflexes at this point are gone. All the tests are essentially coming back negative, and they can't pinpoint what it was. I think the telltale sign was that my face was paralyzed, which is a symptom of Miller-Fisher. Now, at this point, I am an inpatient at the hospital. One of the nurses went to get me ready for bed, and she went to brush my teeth because at this point I'm fully paralyzed. She lifted a cup of water to my mouth to rinse and tilted it up, and it just ran down the side of my mouth and onto me. She called intensive care right away and said, he needs to go down to ICU. And that's when they had really started pumping me full of painkillers. So by the time I got to intensive care in the ICU, I was breathing on my own. I was taking extremely short breaths, and I could not hold a sentence because I just did not have the lung capacity to be able to. The machines they had me hooked up to, my heart rate was extremely elevated at the time. The pain is only bearable because of the drugs and the painkillers I was on. Finally, they had fed a feeding tube into my stomach to get me some sort of volume, but I had already noticed I was starting to lose weight. They were concerned about aspirating, so they weren't giving me anything to consume orally in concerns of choking or whatever the case was. The night I got into intensive care, I was put onto the ventilator and intubated. I think a little bit of the delay in me getting transferred down to the ICU was because COVID was at its peak and there was a demand on the ventilators. It was definitely a commodity that everybody wanted because of COVID, and there were only so many to go around. January 7th, 2021, there was a awful snowstorm that night, and the power of the hospital went out. Me being a construction guy, I said, oh, not a problem, the generators will kick in. The nurses were running around frantically because the generator was not. They had to essentially breathe with the balloon for me because the ventilator had lost power. Without a doubt, the scariest night of my life. And the balloon lasted for about 40 minutes. I remember the nurse was so relieved when the power came back on and she unhooked me and just went and sat down. So I spent a total of 69 days on the ventilator in intensive care. The process of getting off of the ventilator is a little bit of a frustrating one because you want to be off of it so badly when you're on it for that long. Doing different exercises, whatever I could, and then just time. That was probably the hardest thing, is time. You could do as many exercises as you want, but you can't make time move faster. And the syndrome needed to run its course in order for me to plateau. And then once it slowly started coming back up, that was when enough time had passed and my lungs started to work on their own again. So from the time I got off of the ventilator, I spent another week in intensive care just with them monitoring me. And then I got transferred back to the stroke ward where I had been before I was in the intensive care unit. I spent another month there. So at this point, it's now the end of April, and I got transferred to the rehabilitation hospital, in which I spent 2 months there. So from the time I originally went into the hospital to the very first day my wife was able to come into the hospital to see me was upwards of 3 weeks. First time I was able to see my daughter was at least 2 months. And my daughter was not allowed into the hospital. What happened was they actually took me, the ventilator, in a gurney and wheeled me outside. Everybody was freezing because it was middle of February, and that was the first time I was able to see my daughter. And I'll remember how she wanted to play with Dad, but didn't understand why I couldn't hold her. That was hard. I think not being able to see her or hold her was the second hardest part. The night that the power went out was the hardest part because I thought that was it. I'm in a place I've never been before, with something I've never heard of before, when I can't have anybody who I know around me or by my side, and I'm hooked up to all of these machines that are breathing for me. That was harder than anything else that I went through. I thought I was going to have to text my wife and my mom and say goodbye. That was the hardest. Because I wouldn't even know where to start. But is it worse to send a goodbye text, or is it worse to get the phone call that he's gone? That was the hard part. When I was in the rehab hospital, they let me go out for a day pass. It was my daughter's first birthday, and they let me go spend the day with her at home. And so I went back for the day, and, there was lots of family, lots of friends around. It was for a good cause. It was exciting. And it was only for a day. And it was the most uncomfortable almost that I had felt since going into the hospital. I had almost gotten into a routine of having everybody there by my side whenever I needed. The hospital staff would bring you your meals. They would take away your dishes. They... if something fell, they were there to pick it up for you. It was very uncomforting and uneasy to be sitting at home. I had gotten accustomed to being almost institutionalized because it had been all I had known for the past at that point, 5 months. I definitely do still have some lasting kind of PTSD stuff that does follow me around every day, especially having young kids. They've got a heck of a lot more energy than I do. I have to rest when they want to play. Emotionally and mentally, it was not an easy task. And I have not resolved all of those issues. And I don't know where I would be without the support of the GBS Foundation. You can just talk to other individuals that have gone through similar things or the same things, or just a group of peers that have connected in a way that I don't think any of us wish would have ever happened to us, but collectively, all of us take something so negative and try and turn it into a positive. Help I got while I was in the hospital going through everything I went through, the fact that the foundation was there for me, I want to repay that. And I know that there is life after GBS, and I've been arguably happier now than ever. And I've taken something so dark and made it bright. You will have a new appreciation for everything in life as soon as you get better, and you will get better. It's still hard, but knowing that there is life after GBS is the best thing that you can know about, because this too shall pass. That was one of the things the nurses kept telling me in the hospital. And it is a hard thing to go through, but it will come to an end, and you will get better. Be aware, we are rare. Please share.